Go out, don't go out. Wear a mask, don't wear a mask. Isolate, don't isolate. Advice over the past 16 months has been confusing.
To say the least.
And even as we emerge from the worst of the pandemic, there is still confusion as to what the rules actually are now.
There certainly is confusion. It's hard even for journalists to keep up, and that's what we do for a living. Someone who knows about this all too well, who's talking about this confusion, is business leader John Caudwell, who contracted COVID-19 around 3 weeks ago. He's since been caught in the middle of test and trace system and received conflicting advice from the NHS. John, tell us about the confusion that you're experiencing.
Well, the real crux of this matter is that if you want to travel abroad, you need a PCR test. Now, on day 10 of your isolation, the NHS Test and Trace ring you up, and they're very professional, very polite, and they say, at midnight, you're free from your restrictions and you can go about your business. Now, if you happen to want to be travelling the next day or a few days later, you do a PCR test, but what is not being published anywhere near sufficiently is that that PCR test will very likely come back positive because of virus shedding, load shedding. And so it's not necessarily that you've still got the COVID virus. It's not necessarily that you're contagious, but you end up with a positive and go back into another whole 10 days of isolation.
Goodness, that's a good point. John, can I ask, how are you? And were you double jabbed when you got the virus?
No, I wasn't, because I was in Monaco when the jab was offered and I couldn't get back to the UK. I then got back to the UK and got COVID pretty much straight away. Ironically or interestingly, and this is certainly not an advert against or for the jab, but my brother was double jabbed and we all got this COVID virus at the same time at a weekend in Anglesey, and he was more ill for longer than I was. So that's quite an interesting factor, although I'm sure that the majority of people do better as a consequence of having the double jab, but it just wasn't the case in our particular situation.
John, we were talking earlier to a very interesting behavioural scientist from London School of Economics, a guy called Professor Paul Dolan, and we were suggesting how when we look back on COVID, we need to think more about the advice that the politicians get, not just from epidemiologists and natural scientists, but also from social scientists, economists and so on. But I'd say also business leaders. I think business leaders have been very, very quiet during this pandemic. Business leaders who I know personally, who privately have been very critical, but have been scared to speak out. Would you agree with that observation?
Yeah, I think I would, and I have actually spoken out endlessly about the way things were being handled, both from a pandemic point of view, but also from an economic point of view. And my interest has always been minimising deaths overall, which is not just as a result of the COVID virus, but overall as a result of all the other illnesses that have been slightly put onto the back burner or massively put onto the back burner in some cases, and taking a holistic look of all that along with mental health and damage to the economy.
While we have you, it's quite interesting that you've experienced foreign travel, which is another area that the government are accused of giving confusing messages on. How was that for you when you came back?
Well, a nightmare, because I've got businesses in France and Monaco, and it has been a nightmare trying to work out the rules. But it's the same for everybody. Everybody has experienced that nightmare, whether it's been people trying to go on holiday or businessmen trying to conduct their business. And it has been extremely confusing. But I think to some extent, you know, that's very understandable, because we've got all these variants cropping up in different parts of the world. Different countries going into second and third waves, and all the government can really do is try and respond as best that they can to protect the population of Britain, and the same vice versa when France are trying to protect their population or any other country. So I think it's been a huge challenge for the politicians. I don't think they've got everything right by a long way, but I do think they've been trying to do the best. My critique really would be probably more in terms of the economy, because we have certainly could have done a lot more to stimulate new jobs and invest in the environment, invest in the future of Britain, rather than just pour money into people's pockets through furlough.
Just finally and briefly, John, if I may, where the furlough scheme is coming to an end at the end of September, the tapering is happening again, that employers' contribution is going up, 50 billion quid. Has it been good value for money?
Well, yes, it was essential that we protected people from the effects of COVID. But I think it could have been done a bit smarter. For instance, in the early stages, we made people either be fully furloughed or fully at work. Well, that was a ludicrous decision, really. We should have been enabling people to partially furlough and save the government a huge amount of money in the process, and allow people to be able to do a few days a week or 2 days a week or whatever it would be for their current employers. So, there's things we could have done a lot smarter for sure. And I've constantly campaigned about that over the last 15 months.
John Caudwell, founder of Phones for You. We really appreciate you being on GB News.
Pleasure.
Thanks for your time. Thank you.